In this lesson, we're going to work on the texture of the deck by remodeling the base model first, and then towards the end of the lesson, we're going to retexture the screens with a multi-sub object material. So let's get going with the deck. Basically, what is happening here is that we have a flat surface that we're modeling a very three-dimensional texture onto. So you could go and handle this using either a displace or a really aggressive bump, but I'm going to choose the option of rather modeling in these grooves so that I have a very physical model that I can easily map a simple texture onto. This is going to render a lot quicker than using displace or any other type of procedure. So let's isolate this, and let's first of all try and separate the model so that we are only dealing with the portion which is being mapped using the UVW map. So what I'm talking about is this line here. If I just pull this out slightly, I can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 planks are being textured at a time. So I can now go into my editable poly. I'm going to add an editable poly into the stack. I'm going to select all of the edges, right click, connect, and just slide it down until you have that selection being in the same place as your actual texture border. So what I'm therefore creating is a single panel that has a single texture, and then that panel is going to be repeated. So now once I have this in place, I can now delete the rest. And I can also go and simplify this a little bit by removing some of these edges that are not necessary. So I select the edge, right click remove, select the vertex, right click remove, and I'm also going to delete this edge since we're going to recreate it later. And now I need to go and add 8 segments using the connect method. So you can just type in 8 here. And it's a good idea to check that this is all in alignment. So basically you're getting one line into each of those groups. Then you may need to just fine-tune some of them since they may be slightly out of place. So just have a look at the ones that seem to be slightly out. So I'm just zooming in and out as I adjust these lines to suit all of the panels. So this is the last one I'm going to do. Next, we're going to take all those edges by going back into our edge selection, and we're going to chamfer it by a few millimeters. So right click, chamfer, and about 0.03 should be fine. Let's say 0.005. And we then say OK. I'm just going to move this one ever so slightly across. And I'm going to do that manually like so, just so I can get that groove correct. Then I'm going to delete in my left view all of these spaces, the grooves basically, that I don't want to have. I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard. And then back into my edge selection, I'm now going to just deselect the edges on the sides, and I'm going to lock my selection with a spacebar, and holding down shift, just drag down those edges. So that's going to now create an edge everywhere on the sides, and we just need to repeat that here as well. And lastly, let's just select all of the vertices, Control A, right click, weld. And that's going to weld all of these vertices at the bottom. Next, what you want to do is add an extra piece of wood towards the end. In other words, when you have a deck that is facing the pool, you will generally have one going in the perpendicular direction right at the edge. So you want to go and model that. So you can take this part of your model as a building block. Let's just reset our pivot as well and make a copy. And now we can go and delete several of these panels and start working with this one individually. Since it is already textured and everything is ready, we're going to turn it by 90 degrees, going to move it into place, and these ones over here we're just going to move a little bit shorter and leave a tiny groove there. Then as well, if you're quite fussy about your modeling, or if you want to get your texture correct on the edge, you can do a box texture, and then you can look at the alignment just so that you can get the grooves of the wood in the right place. So most of the time we won't even see those edges from the distances, but it does help when you have larger pieces of wood. Here with the texture, I just need to add a tiny bit of distance there. And one more thing that we can do, just to add even more detail, let's go and select the top faces of all of these planks, control click the edge so that we change the selection, and then right click and chamfer again, and let's just create a very small chamfer to that as well. So here I'm going to just stretch this out. It doesn't matter that it's one very long piece. I'm going to just stretch that out until it hits this point here. And I'm going to do the same thing. Let's just chamfer that edge. Now with the rest of the panels, I'm going to just manually go and copy them across. And you can do it like so. And then just instance that a couple of times. The last one is going to be slightly unique if you do want to model that notch in place. But I do think that you can get away with that timber being inside the wall. So the last one needs to be modeled. This one will be trimmed off a little bit smaller. So go copy and just choose these two and then Control I, and that will delete those others. So there you have your deck element. Once you're done, you can go and take this entire set and you can group it all together. So group, and this will be called pool deck. And there you go. The next part that we're going to work on are the screens. Now the screen is a little bit tricky because we had modeled a single element that actually should have multiple materials. That means that the frame is going to be in one color, and we have an infill panel which is all within the same object. Now we could go and detach this and then go and texture it simply by adding a normal material to it, just like we've done to everything else. But if we go and detach one single screen, then all of the others are going to lose that infill. In other words, that detachment is now going to happen to every single screen, and you don't have that infill copied just like everything else. So you're pretty much in a situation where you now need to work with a multi-sub object material, and this is going to apply to several other objects to the scene as well. So let's go into our material editor, and over here we're going to create a new material called screen multi. Then instead of V-Ray material, we're going to choose multi-sub object underneath standard. And we're going to keep the old material as sub. It doesn't really matter. Let's actually discard everything and just start afresh. Now, if I know that I have two materials to work with, the frame and the infill, then I can just go here and delete everything until I only have two left. Then I can drag in the frames and instance that. This one will be called frames. This one will be called infill. Then the infill material can be a new material. Let's just use the timber deck so far as a temporary copy, and we can go and see later if we need to change that at all. Basically what I would like to achieve is to have very thin strips of wood running vertically, and this is just to give some solar shading as well as give a little bit more warmth to the building. So I'm going to apply this to the screen, and the frame itself is going to be on material ID number 1. So let's just go and select all of the infill, and that's going to be ID number 2. So this is where you apply that material ID, polygon material ID. You set it at 2, enter, and then Control I to invert your selection, and this will all be set ID 1, enter. Now once you're at your top level, you see that you already have the frames acting as one material and the internal material as the second. Let's now apply a UV map box, and let's go down here and use bitmap fit and go down to our project files where we have all our textures, and now we have that in place. I do think that it would look better as a vertical screen, so let's turn that, and here I can just cheat a little bit by rescaling it. Now I would like to actually have slightly bigger gaps. So what you could do is set up a custom opacity for it, which means that you would come in here and you would basically clear this texture, and instead you would use a gradient ramp. So you would discard the old map, and here you would want to have a solid set of stripes. So we're basically going to have something linear, it's going to be solid. We're going to have a opacity, in other words a gap, and then the white part here, if we just right click and edit those properties, we can go through those different flag numbers, and we're going to set this as white, so in other words purely opaque, and this is going to be transparent. Now this opacity is going to be repeated in the U direction, so V is vertical, U is horizontal. It's going to be repeated 8 times, and it's going to be turned by 90 degrees. So let's just see how that looks. So far we have this, and if we increase the black, then basically we're enlarging the gap that we have in between the wood. So let's just go and enlarge it to about there, and we can even hit render and just see what that looks like. So let's go ahead now and apply this material to all of the screen elements. So let's click on screens in our material, in our layer manager, select highlighted, right click, isolate, double check that your selection is actually correct. You just want to be selecting these objects, and in your material editor just apply that material. So now lastly we can render everything and the screens are done. Next we're going to be modeling and texturing the rest of the small details around the house.